Mentioned there were two big political stories the other day. One was this change which will allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in the next general election. Like I said, mixed views on that. Um, the other was a visit by Friedrich Merz of Germany. Um, this wasn't a full state visit, so it wasn't the sort of it didn't have the grandeur of Emmanuel Macron's visit earlier in the month, but it was important nonetheless. I'm just going to read out a piece from the Metro on this visit by Chancellor Merz. Um, Both he and Starmer are relatively new in their position. Starmer a little bit longer, but Merz has only been in office for a few months. He's a striking figure. He's one of the tallest world leaders at the moment, second only to the Albanian leader Idi Rama. Merz apparently is 6'6", so that surely is a near record. He must be the tallest German chancellor ever. I'm not sure who our tallest prime minister was. I think Neville Chamberlain was quite tall. I'm not sure who that record goes to. I think Starmer's average height. There's a picture of them together too, so get that height difference. So he's a striking figure. And I'm just going to read out this piece. It's by Craig Munro in the Metro. And I'm going to read out a little bit of the Eye, which also covers it. I personally think it's an important development. And just before I get into this, I think I've said this before. I think closer cooperation with our European neighbours makes all the sense in the world. It's not betraying Brexit; it's just realpolitik at a time when Russia and China are being ever more assertive. In the case of Russia, aggressive, um, and also we have Donald Trump in the White House. I think in that context, it makes absolute sense to work closer with our European neighbours. Keir Starmer hailed the closeness of the UK and Germany as the two nations agreed a treaty, the first between the countries since the end of World War II, that will open up the passport e-gates to Brits and help deter Channel migrants. The Prime Minister said the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz signed a deal to be known as the Kensington Treaty, with Sir Keir saying they will look to work ever more closely on trade, security and defence. The two leaders agreed to reinforce Euro-Atlantic security and support their defence forces in an agreement that was also signed by Foreign Secretary David Lammy and his German counterpart Johann Wadephul. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Not sure if it's a silent J or not. Keir described it as evidence of the closeness of our relationship as it stands today, as well as a statement of intent, a statement of our ambition to work ever more closely together. As part of the deal, Berlin has agreed to let frequent travellers from the UK use passport e-gates from next month, with all UK nationals to be included as soon as technically possible. And a task force will be set up to pave the way for direct train services between the two countries. It's hoped they could begin within the next decade. The treaty says Britain and Germany will enable school exchange trips to go ahead visa-free by the end of the year, and the countries will cooperate in the joint fight against organised cross-border crime in an effort to end migrant trafficking. This includes Germany cracking down on gangs storing boats and warehouses there that are intended for legal channel crossings. Calais and Dunkirk are in the north of France, so I imagine they use that as a sort of hub to go over the German border. I wasn't aware of that actually, that's where they stored them. This includes, yeah, the countries will pursue deep exchanges on security issues such as arms policy and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. The treaty was signed in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which German Prince Albert helped to establish in Kensington, West London. Mr. Merz said he had been surprised to hear that it was the first treaty since the war, telling Sir Keir, "We had you in the European Union and we thought that was enough, but we are now learning it is not enough, so we have to do more on that." Slightly curious statement to make. Um, I before I read a bit from the Eye, I saw some comments in this saying whenever Starmer meets another world leader, we wonder what he's going to sell out this country on. It annoys me that people could be so short-sighted. Of course, this country has many, many pressing problems. Of course, the Prime Minister has to address that, regardless of who the Prime Minister is. But I don't understand the mindset that people have that seems to think that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom shouldn't be working with his counterparts in other countries. That is part of the job of a Prime Minister. It's literally part of his office to work with other leaders. So I don't know why people take that reaction. I mean, do they want to have negative relations with Germany and France? It doesn't make sense to me. And of course, the agreements are far from perfect. I know the deal, for example, on migrants with Macron doesn't look overly impressive because we have a ratio of one migrant being returned in France in exchange for many more coming here. So I'm also quite skeptical of that. I'm not sure that it will work, but principle of working with Paris and Berlin to me is a very strong one. I would like to see similar things with Madrid and Rome, and frankly, the rest of the European Union and other European countries. It's not betraying Brexit. We're not rejoining the EU. It's about realizing these are countries that have similar principles, that are similar sized economies. It makes all the sense in the world to work with them. I just don't understand the hostility to it. Here's a good picture of Merz looking at the famous portraits in 10 Downing Street. It's a bit grainy, but what I make out there is Chamberlain, Attlee, can't make those two out. We have Sir Alec Douglas Home, Harold Wilson, Ted Heath, um, Jim Callaghan, and Margaret Thatcher. And obviously, with each new Prime Minister, I mean, we've currently got, I think, 9 living Prime Ministers, so it's a record. Anyway, I'm not going to read out the full I report, but just repeating some of the things I said, but I'll just say this. Signing the first treaty between the two countries since the Second World War, the Prime Minister said it was a statement of our ambition to work ever more closely together. If I read that in the other one. Merz said he had not realised that it was the first such treaty, but said it demonstrated the increasing closeness of the two nations, along with France. Merz, speaking in German, said that Germany was linked with France through the Elysee Treaty, and the UK and France were linked by the Lancaster House Treaty. He added, "It's no coincidence that I happen to be here a week after the state visit of the French president to London, Emmanuel Macron. I will host Emmanuel Macron next week in Berlin, and in autumn we will have the Franco-German Council of Ministers in France. I've given those dates because they demonstrate that the E3, Britain, France and Germany, are converging in their positions on foreign policy, on security policy, on migration policy, but also on economic policy issues." I think it's Merck to actually coin that term, the E3. Not sure how Italy feels about not being included, or Spain. But anyway, the Kensington Treaty document details a UK and German agreement to reinforce Euro-Atlantic security and ensure effective deterrence against potential aggressors through their defence forces, as well as looking to improve defence cooperation in the future. It also reaffirmed support from NATO and NATO allies. Under Olaf Scholz, Franco-German relations were somewhat strained as they took a different approach to Ukraine, but relations have improved under Friedrich Merz with Paris. So we have three major European powers here: the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. That's a pretty formidable alliance. I mean, really, we're talking about the world's um, fourth, sixth, and seventh largest economies. You know, three pretty powerful countries working together. I don't know why anyone would have hostility to that. Like you say, in a world where you have an aggressive Russia, and assertive and, yeah, I would say malevolent China, and a United States that currently is led by Donald Trump, this makes absolute sense to me. I welcome it. And I do give Starmer credit. You know, when I made the video about Starmer's premiership, some people were questioning why I give 4.5 out of 10. Presumably they thought it was too generous. Well, there are many things I'm critical of Labour on. I'm very critical of their response to welfare. I'm critical of their weakness on China. But I do think they've taken an assertive stance on Russia. Um, I uh, I think it's right that they're taking a more hardline stance on Israel these days. And I welcome Starmer's reset with the EU. I think those are positive things. So I'm not going to apologise for giving credit where I think credit's due. I will still criticise where I think the government's getting it wrong. But I do think these genuine efforts to reach out to Berlin and Paris, I welcome it. I think it's a good thing. Um, I just hope it, stands the test of time. If Putin isn't backing down, European leaders need to take an assertive stance. So I welcome it. Some of those things, I went to Berlin in 2023. There was no major travel issues. Yeah, there was a slightly longer queue, but it wasn't a major thing. Berlin now has one operational airport. It used to have three. It's just one big airport, Berlin Brandenburg, which isn't that convenient. It's outside the city administration. It's actually in the state of Brandenburg. So I had to get left into the city centre, but you actually need to get a mainline train. So I think Berlin needs to get some better connection to the airport. Um, Here in Tyne and Wear, we have a direct link to Newcastle Airport on the Tyne and Wear Metro. Um, but I got my passport stamped at Dusseldorf. Actually, it was not at Berlin; it was at Dusseldorf. Then I got an internal flight to Berlin. Um, I didn't mind. I quite liked the idea of getting my passport stamped, but there was no major queue. So the thing about school groups getting visa free travel, actually, as it stands, it is basically visa free if you're less than a month anyway. So I don't need to get a visa to go to Germany or France. Well, at least not Germany if it's less than a month. So actually, I don't think that affects most people. My passport's out of date anyway. I need to update it. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. It's something I welcome. Of course, there's going to be complications. There's going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be cynicism, but the principle of Western Europe's three most powerful countries working together, to me, makes absolute sense. So for me, I welcome the E3.